Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Amrita, for a very warm welcome. I'm delighted to be here at Khaki. I've enjoyed so many of the talks that have been presented here, and I hope you'll all find my talk equally as engaging. And as mentioned, I'm talking about Kapurthala's French connection. And it was really rather unique and extraordinary for its time. I'm going to be focusing on Maharaja Jagatjit Singh of Kapurthala, who was just such a remarkable personality. I mean, he probably was one of the most dynamic figures of the late 19th and earliest century India. I can't do justice to his personality or the magnitude of his life in this talk. In fact, I can't even fully explore his French connection in this short time, but I'm going to give you an overview about this, and I hope you'll agree it was rather unique and exceptional. He was known as Le Roi Francophonie, which literally means the French-speaking king, and he infused so many French elements into his state of Kapurthala that it became known as the Paris of the Punjab. Now, for tonight's talk, I'm going to be a little bit unconventional. I'm usually, being so history focused, I'm very chronologically orientated. I have a start date and end date, and I'm going to be more jumping around a little bit this time. And I'm going to first focus on France and Paris and how his standing there and how he was perceived there. Then I'm going to return to India and talk more about Kapurthala. And for my first image, I'm jumping again out of chronological order to 1939. And I'm showing you this directory called Les Amis de la France dans le monde, which really translates as the Friends of France across the world. And it was a very prestigious register put out by the government of France. And it listed all personalities across the world who had close affiliations with France. And the only two Indians in this registry were Maharaja Jagatjit Singh and his son, Prince Amarjit. And in this write-up on him, below, he also puts that since he first arrived in France, he felt so welcome. He made so many friends, and how much he admired the art and culture of that country. And we have to remember that at that time, Paris, especially France, that was the cultural capital of the world. And not only that, French language was so important then. And it really, as we'll discover, really helped just expand his horizons, really opened up the world to him as he became fluent in this language. And it was really when he was a young child. Now I'm jumping back to 1880. He's shown here when he's 12 years old. And around this time, he was a very precocious student. He had already been on the throne of Kapurthala, the Gadi, since he was 5 when his father died. Kapurthala state was administered by a regency. And he had these very helpful, devoted British tutors and mentors. And they really saw that he was this precocious child. He had this great capacity for languages and for learning. And they really nurtured that. And he wrote that ever since he was, he studied geography. Let me first begin with that. He studied geography on this globe. He would pore over this globe of the world, and they would tell him about these places. And he wrote that ever since I can remember, I've longed to travel the world. And then he, of course, would grow up and be one of the most well-traveled Indians of his time. But he was fluent in Persian, English, Italian, Urdu, Gurmukhi, Sanskrit, and of course, French, which he declared as the most beautiful language of all. And not only that, it became so useful. And when he traveled across the globe, eventually, you can see this is a map outlining his travels. the majority of places that he did visit, whether it be Egypt or Japan, the imperial court of Russia, French was a language spoken. It was a very important working language. So that just helped. It just helped facilitate relationships and friendships and made things easier. For example, when he first left India in 1893, his first port of call was Egypt. Now, he did not speak Arabic, but the language he did speak was France, and that's what he spoke with the Khedive of Egypt. Likewise, when he went to Italy, and again, Russia, all over the world. Now, today, when we travel, for example, I'm thinking of going to Germany. I don't speak German, but I tell myself, well, everyone speaks a little bit of English, but back then it was French. So it was not just a beautiful language, but he found it to be an incredibly useful language. And I have this map here. I just have this Kapurthala ruler in Saigon. Sometimes I forget to add that in French, Cochin, China, modern Vietnam, that region, it was widely spoken as well. And it's easier to say what are the countries, just a handful, that he did not visit, because he eventually visited so many. He was a renowned, intrepid traveler. But of all of the places, seeing the world far and wide, it was France that was his absolute love. And he loved everything about the country. And he first arrived there in 1893. That was his inaugural voyage abroad. And he's shown at a studio with his a French studio in Paris with his entourage. You didn't have your selfies that you could take in front of the Eiffel Tower, but you had to go to a studio. But here he is with his entourage. And it's kind of interesting to note here that they're all wearing European attire, but with their traditional Indian headdress. In those days, you had to cover your head, men and ladies. You just did not go out with a bare head. Even in Kapurthala state, you wore a turban, whether you were a Sikh, Muslim, or Hindu. And you can even see Mr. Wood, his tutor and lifelong friend. He's wearing a stovetop hat. But he would often, when he traveled, I should add, wore ashkens or shirwanis, and that really made a bold, dramatic statement when he went out. But when he arrived in Paris, he was absolutely mesmerized by the beauty of the city. And he writes about how he climbed to the top of the Eiffel Tower and he saw Paris below him, and was just particularly enchanted with the architecture. But for those of you who have visited Paris, everything that you can think of that you love about Paris, the cuisine, the cafes, strolling in those wonderful parks, the museums, just the beauty of the city, the atmosphere, that is what he found so intriguing. And in addition, he had that advantage, speaking the language so fluently, so he was able to quickly assimilate into Parisian society and made some great lifelong friends. And chief among his friends was the Princess de Broglie. She was a French sugar heiress, and she was a society leader. And she and her husband quickly took the Maharaja into their fold, introduced him to everyone. And they eventually came out, made many trips to Kapurthala, as did other French people. And she really had a great influence on him. And he would often spend not just time at their beautiful Paris mansion, but he would visit them at their absolutely magnificent structure, the Chateau Chaumont-sur-Loire in the Loire Valley, just outside of Paris. And you could see these, it's a really magnificent architecture with these grand turrets and fairy tale castle. And she had everyone there. She was a renowned hostess. She had, the King of England would come, the leading artists. And so again, her friendship really helped him really become a great figure in Paris. He met everyone through her. So we can't discount just what a great influence she was. And we will revisit this structure a little bit later. So just do recall it with these marvelous turrets. So we went to these, as a figure in Parisian society over the years, went to all the great parties. When you look at the columns of the society columns of the day in Paris, you'll always see a bold-faced name being the Maharaja of Kapurthala or members of his family. He was invited to every party that mattered, all of the big splashy parties, and was really considered, I guess, what you'd call a trophy guest, in that he was so articulate, he was urbane, he was charming, and he was this exotic Indian potentate. So he was quite, quite. I'm sorry, I can hear somebody needs to mute. Sorry about that. So he was quite sought after, and later on, not just to be a guest, but would give his own parties. Someone recently pointed out on this, we see this write-up, the Princess de Broglie's gorgeous jewel ball, and then below it in the column, we see why many orphans never succeed in life, the irony, and kind of point out that some things never change. You're always going to see these disparities in the world, but I do digress. The Maharaja was so well known in Paris, again, from 1893 onwards, we're jumping ahead to the 1920s, that he was often caricaturized by an artist called Sem. And Sem would draw leading figures of Parisian society, and to be drawn by him was kind of a badge of honor. It means you have arrived. And people would beg him to make a rendition of him, but if he didn't feel that you were it, he would not be swayed to draw you. So it really speaks volumes that the Maharaja and his family were featured in at least a dozen of Sem's sketches. And this is rather charming. He's at a Rolls-Royce showroom, and it says with 40 horsepower, His Highness doesn't need more than 2 elephants, or it's more than 2 elephants. So kind of spoofs the fact that, he has the elephants and the Rolls Royces. Rolls Royce was a brand that many of the Indian Maharajas preferred, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about the luxury brands in a bit, so we'll get to that. When he was in Paris for the season, he was every inch the Parisian gentleman, and you can really see him looking like a proper Parisian flâneur in this image. Again, from about probably, this is a little bit earlier, probably from the teens, and he'd go for the season, which was the summer season when it was stifling hot in India. And again, as I mentioned, just was a leading figure in Parisian society, and no party would be really complete without him on the guest list. And in addition, he was so popular that the French newspapers would always write about what was happening in India too. So for example, even when he was in the country, this is in January of 1911, they were widely reporting on the marriage of his eldest son. And I think I should add, it wasn't just in France where he was so well known and had such a widespread reputation. But again, this talk is focusing on France. He really was a global figure, known in the US, known in England, known South America, but I'll just add that in. But in France, for example, to this day, a diplomat recently said to me, when we think of the word Maharaja, the word Kapurthala comes to mind. It is the Maharaja of Kapurthala. Now, his life in Paris, time in Paris, wasn't just frivolities and parties and shopping and all that. He's shown here with the French president, Aristide Briand, and they're having a meeting at the Ritz Paris. He was received by every French president from the time he first arrived in 1893 onwards. And many of the presidents he became, not just had a formal relationship with, but became very good friends with. So he was also very much respected in diplomatic and governmental circles, and was a frequent guest at the Élysée Palace, the French president's palace. This is jumping up again to the 30s. And I'm sure some of you might have recognized the figure of Maharaja Bhupinder Singh of Patiala sitting next to him. So many of the Indian Maharajas would go to Paris and take in all the delights there during the season, not just Kapurthala, but he probably became the best known. Again, aided by the fact that he spoke French and just was in a different league in that regard. But I think it's also worth mentioning, since so many of you joining in here obviously have a great interest in history, and that is the fact that the Maharaja of Kapurthala's dear friend, Maharaja Jagatjit Singh of Bikaner, was one of the signers of the Treaty of Versailles in 1919, which officially ended and set the terms for the end of World War I. So that's something to be proud of, that there was an Indian signatory there. Now, because he spoke French, he was and he was really an unofficial and official diplomat for India. He really represented our country well, being this well-spoken, well-educated, very charming, gracious person. But he also was the Indian representative to the League of Nations in Geneva 3 times in 1926, 27, and 29. The League of Nations was our forerunner to the modern UN. So he gave his speeches, in French, perfect French, and was just, again, very highly regarded as a diplomat, and an official diplomat or official. And in addition, he inaugurated the Indian War Memorial at France and Flanders in 1927, and this paid tribute to all of the fallen Indian soldiers who gave their lives during the Great War. So the Maharaja was also very highly regarded because he gave a lot of donations to these towns in Western France that had been devastated during the fighting. And in addition, back home in Kapurthala, he was very generous to the war veterans. Now, another thing that he did regarding France, in terms of being a great friend of France, is that there was a time in the 20s, when the French franc went into free fall, and he had given sort of a boost to it, buying francs, or somehow it's similar to when we buy bonds, but in any case, it really greatly aided the French government. So that they were incredibly grateful to him and coming to France's existence. So they awarded him with the French Légion d'honneur, which is their highest honor that they bestow. There are many classes of this. He was given the Grand Croix, as was his eldest son, Tika Paramjit Singh. In addition, his son, Prince Amarjit Singh, who served as a military aide to Admiral Foch and General Garand, also received this, as did another son. And really what's remarkable is that just recently, about 5 years ago, his great-grandson, Tika Shatrajit Singh, was also awarded the Légion d'honneur. So it's really unprecedented. In India, you have 3 generations, you have 5 Légion d'honneurs within 3 generations, so not consecutive. It still has not been topped in India, and it underscores this ongoing relationship between the House of Kapurthala and the French government. They also gave him use of this beautiful Second Empire mansion on the fringes of Paris, on the Bois de Boulogne. On this boulevard, still today, they own many of these beautiful buildings. One of them is called the Villa Windsor, where the Duke of Windsor, the Duke and Duchess of Windsor spent their years when they left when they left England after he abdicated. So this particular house was called the Pavillon de Kapurthala, and he was given this use of this house on a peppercorn branch, well under market. And that's just the French government's way of saying thank you to him. And he became a legendary host here. This pavilion was strategically located so that, you know, there were races at Longchamp polo, and after these events, everyone would congregate at the chateau, at the pavilion, and he was this magnanimous host. His parties were extremely to be a guest at his parties, it was very sought after to make the guest list. And they were very cosmopolitan. He loved the cosmopolitan atmosphere of Paris. And you can see on the right, he is speaking with the minister of Siam and his daughters, and he's reading some guests below. So I want to read an excerpt from an article. It really says, Paris has been the place of meeting of India's Maharajas. Among them, the Maharaja of Kapurthala is without contest the most Parisian of all, and he takes every opportunity of showing his sympathy towards France. His receptions in Paris are famous, and it can be said of him that he wears with the most Parisian manner his oriental aigrette. So it was widely acknowledged that among the Maharajas that he was the the most Parisian of the Maharajas. So I'm going to transition over to India, and I hope that I've given some sense of just how he was held in such high esteem and was so widely known in France. So now we're just going to jump back to India. And we're not at Kapurthala yet. I first thought I'd show you the Chateau Kapurthala in Missouri, which drew a lot of influence from the Chateau Chaumont-sur-Loire, which we saw, turrets and steep hip roof. This was directly influenced by the beautiful chateaus in the Loire Valley. And this opened in 1899, showing you as it looks today. Some alterations made to for this climate. In France, you'd have limestone and a slate roof that wouldn't last through the monsoons or Missouri winters. So here you have a tin roof, which we find throughout the hill stations, and this local quarried stone, which is very sturdy. As I mentioned, 1889. And actually that style, the French Renaissance revival style, really came into fashion as well. So it was quite popular. I'm showing you the roof because it gives you a sense of scale of this building. And if anyone's ever gone in the Loire Valley and taken a hot air balloon over these grand chateaus, that's really quite magnificent. So I wanted to show you this angle. I'm not spending too much time in the chateau, on the chateau, because it's just to illustrate his love of French architecture. One could really devote a lot of time there to showing one interior shot of a dinner party he's given. And you can see the interiors. He was really entertained just so elegantly. So we'll go back to Kapurthala, and as I mentioned, he was fluent in French. In French, he wrote his diaries in French. It was the language that was the sort of family language when they were together, and his chief officials also knew French. So when they traveled, it was very helpful for him. And he was so passionate about the language that he introduced French as a subject at Rondeer College in Kapurthala. And it was very difficult to find to be able to learn French in North India. Very few places had offered French, but so this was quite unusual and quite an opportunity. And he had French tutors come up from Pondicherry to teach, and people came from all around. Now, in addition to promoting French language and offering French, he was very, very keen that girls were able to be fully educated. He really was an advocate of that. He also pushed for co-education. So he was really forward thinking. And did quite a bit he was always thinking about the people of his state, what he would call the subjects of Kapurthala, and wanted to make sure that they had modern facilities for education. He visited during his travels abroad schools and hospitals, and wanted to bring back modern curriculums for his schools. And so he learned a lot during his travels too, and wanted to infuse what he learned to make Kapurthala a better place for the inhabitants. One thing he loved about Paris was, and what also was an essence about all these aspects that add the essence of the Paris of the Punjab, wasn't just the language, it was the landscape. And he loved how in Paris you had these beautiful boulevards, parks, fountains. The quality of life in Paris is so enhanced for the residents because they have all these wide green open spaces. And likewise, he wanted the citizens of Kapurthala to have this so they could enjoy beautiful parks and places to walk. So Kapurthala formerly had all of these great, really lovely parks and fountains, and very, very similar to what you would find in Paris. Sadly, today, there are land constraints across India, so there are some snippets of these remnants still left, but by and large, it has disappeared, which is a bit sad. Now, mostly people think of Kapurthala as the Paris of the Punjab because of the Jagatjit Palace, which is this magnificent structure opened in 1908. And when we look at it straight on, we really see that it is straight out of textbook French architecture. Of course, the dichotomy is having the Maharaja atop his elephant with his retinue below. But he fell in love with French architecture, loved every aspect of French culture and aesthetics, and wanted to infuse this into his new palace. He even hired a French architect, Alexandre Marcel, who was one of the leading Beaux-Arts trained architects of the time. And we look at it, again, we could spend a whole lecture just on this structure, but you can see most prominently the mansard roof, the colonnades, the beautiful gardens. He was very influenced by especially Versailles and the Louvre in the architecture, and he loved the gardens of Versailles with their sunken gardens and with the fountain. So he had those all integrated. Showing you the palace today, it's now a military school. Sadly, the grounds are now used for band marching and for sport, so we don't have those gardens, but you can see the structure still very much stands. It gives you kind of an idea in color just to see what it looks like. I love my aerial views. I think you might have figured that out. And this view of the palace shows you the scale of it, and really shows you the rear and how it was set up. And you can also get a nice view of these beautiful French manicured embroidery gardens that he had. And also, if you look at this, I had mentioned he was influenced by Versailles. It wasn't a copy of Versailles. Here's Versailles, right? And then here is the Jagatjit Palace. So you can kind of get a sense with the columns and arches, the influence, and also the Louvre with that mansard building. And I'm showing you, jumping all the way over to America, I'm showing you where I live, because I'm preempting a question I often get, and that is, how did you become so interested in the Jagatjit Palace in Kapurthala? Well, I've always loved French architecture, and I live, this is where I live when I'm in America. I don't live in the whole building, I should add. So this building opened roughly the same time as the Jagatjit Palace. And when I came on one of my trips to visit family in India, I was just absolutely floored by the fact that up in Punjab, in North India, there was this beautiful mansard structure. So wanted to learn more about it. And that's what it led me to Kapurthala and beyond. So just wanted to add that in. Now we'll go into the interior of the Jagatjit Palace. And the Maharaja chose everything, all details. He helped choose, working with the architect and the plans. And he also chose the furnishings, all the beautiful objets d'art. He loved to travel around, go antiquing, picking up things. And you can see here the gilt work, all the detail. There was a parquet floors, marble inlays, everything you would find in a beautiful French palace, you would find in the Jagatjit Palace. And if you were to walk in this room, as it looks in this photo, you wouldn't think you were in India until you looked at some of the picture frames and saw that they were Indian. That would be your giveaway. And French visitors were just astonished when they saw this, because it was just so authentic. All the details were just incredible. Unfortunately, I think we're a little blocked on the color slide, but here's just a color image so you can see that beautiful gilt work on the ceiling in his Louis Quinze salon. The furniture, I'm often asked, was it, where was this sourced from? Was it antique or not? No, there was a firm called Waring and Gillow, and they reproduced every style of furniture you can imagine. They had an extensive catalog. They supplied furniture for many of the palaces in India as well, not just Jagatjit Palace. So this was all custom made for the palace. Now, I mentioned Versailles. This is the influence of Versailles. This is a ceiling mural from the Palais de Versailles. You can see this wonderful ethereal scene of Apollo and his chariot. And likewise in Kapurthala, you see throughout, you see, say, classical themes on these murals on the ceilings too. So all these, again, not a replica, but the elements were, same type of elements were infused throughout the palace. And for example, this detail you can see on the left is Versailles, and on the right is a detail from the Jagatjit Palace. You can see these putti that were almost sort of the same style. And in addition, this scheme of geometric marble patterns inlay that you would find throughout the Jagatjit Palace. He was a legendary host, whether he was in Paris or Missouri at the Chateau, or here at the palace. And this is the state dining room set for a grand banquet. This was actually a smaller banquet. I think this is only set up for about 24. But we have so many reports from French travelers when they did their travelogues about the magic of dining in this room and under candlelight, and how it was so authentically French and so beautiful, and that they were just amazed to find this in the Punjab. And I know sometimes when you travel and you are in Europe, you're enjoying the European cuisine, but sometimes you just want a good curry. And likewise, these travelers would often put down that they were enjoying Indian cuisine during their travels, but it was so wonderful to have French cuisine when they arrived in Kapurthala, because it was so authentic. Just a detail from that room showing that lovely ceiling and one of the tapestries. I mentioned that the cuisine was even French. Everything was so French in this when he entertained. And here's just a menu. You can see that everything was written out in French, either authentic French traditional dishes, or, for example, korma d'agneau et riz pilaf is lamb korma with rice pilaf. So, or it would be Frenchified, so to speak, written out in French. He sent his head chef to Le Cordon Bleu and Escoffier to really hone his skills. So this was as top-notch French as you would get, and all of the beautiful service on all the accoutrements on the tables were also sourced from France, from either one of the Limoges manufacturers, or Baccarat, or some of the other luxury firms. Here's his Baccarat set. He bought a big set in 1897 when he visited the Baccarat showroom. But he didn't just go into these luxury purveyors and just see their fronts and that was it and shop. He was so curious that he wanted to see the factories, how things were made. How was crystal blown? How was perfume made in the factory? So he would always make visits to see how things were made, or would go to maybe steel factories, other not as glamorous places of manufacturing. And what he was really intent on, not just being curious, but he wanted to set up industry in Kapurthala. He wanted to make sure that there was thriving resources for the people of Kapurthala. So he'd often get an idea, visit a factory and say, well, we can set this up in Kapurthala. And many of these industries and factories that he helped set up in the 1930s onwards are today thriving and are employing thousands of people, not just in Punjab, but across India. So that's really quite something that is part of his legacy. Now, I can't talk about the Maharaja of Kapurthala without talking about his relationship with Cartier. Maharaja was very good friends with the Cartier family long before Jacques Cartier came out to India for the 1911 Delhi Durbar, where he really networked and met many of the other princes. But Kapurthala's relationship goes back well beyond that, at least to the turn of the century. And it actually continues today with friendships between the two families. And Jacques Cartier, the family were great clients of Cartier, but the firm is best known for producing this wonderful emerald tiara made by Cartier for his 1927 Golden Jubilee, which marked 50 years on the Gadi of Kapurthala. I want to add that many of these firms, such as Cartier, Baccarat, Rolls-Royce, all of these luxury firms, not just in France, but beyond, many of these firms really are still extant and in business thanks to the patronage of the Indian Maharajas. Because, for example, in 1917, you lost all of the Russian clients. They lost their fortunes, if not their heads. And so you didn't have that market anymore to cater to. 1929 American stock market, no Americans were buying, but the Indians were continuing to patronize the firm. And it's widely acknowledged that these firms may not have survived had it not been for that Indian patronage. So they remain grateful, and India still is now an increasingly important market. So that legacy continues. Another heritage brand that's very closely associated with the Indian Maharajas, and especially Kapurthala, is Louis Vuitton. The Maharaja, well, all of them as great travelers, you couldn't just go away for a week to Europe. You were gone for 3 months or so. So you had to have trunks to keep everything. And, they traveled extensively. There were clothes for black tie, clothes for sports, hats, gloves. You can see one of the Maharaja's wardrobes, and these are his actual clothes. You see here in the frame. And it was just quite another era compared to how we travel now. It was really the golden age of travel, where everyone had their Louis Vuitton or Goyard steamer trunks. But Louis Vuitton is most famously known for association with the Indian princes and Kapurthala, because that has continued on today with the Maharaja's great grandson, Tika Chatterjee, having been associated with the firm LVMH, as with the Maharaja's great-grandson, Prince Surya, also had been affiliated with the firm. So it's a rather enduring relationship. I'm jumping away from luxury and and entertainment and dining and all of that, because I wanted to just show you and focus on another aspect of Maharaja Jagatjit Singh, and that is him seen here as a grandfather, very devoted grandfather with his two youngest grandchildren, Asha and Sukhjit, present Maharaja of Kapurthala, shown in this lovely little charming goat cart. You can even see a Kapurthala crest on the side. So often we tend to not think of the human side of someone who has this great personality, and we often don't think of when we're caught up in talking about palaces and jewelry and luxury. We also don't think of what some of these Indian rulers did for the betterment of the people. And they were very devoted to their people, and that is sadly often been swept aside, and we don't spend as much time acknowledging that. So I just wanted to digress for a minute and show him smiling, very happy with his two grandchildren. He was a very devoted family man. Returning to our theme, why Kapurthala was the Paris of the Punjab, here's just another piece of that mosaic. But you might think, how is this related to Paris? This is, yes, the Moorish mosque of Kapurthala, and it was built in this North African style, where you see this singular minaret and these horseshoe arches. It's a dramatic difference from what you see across India, which in North India, which is that Indo-Mughal style, the central bulbous dome and the four minarets. The Maharaja had long desired to build a beautiful mosque for his Muslim subjects. And prior to partition, Kapurthala was a majority Muslim. And it was a state where he, even though he was a Sikh ruler, he didn't have his administration full of just Sikhs. He really was very much committed to or focused on the fact that, is a man capable? Are they honest? Are they decent? That is how you would advance in Kapurthala state within the administration. And prior to partition, Kapurthala really was a model state of all communities having so much respect for each other. So getting back to this mosque and why this was built, he felt that they needed a new mosque, and a beautiful one. And he wasn't going to just build in the style that was known throughout North India. He wanted to put his own stamp on, or a unique stamp on the mosque. So he was in North Africa in 1922 and greatly admired this style. He thought it was so beautiful and so unique, especially this Kutubia Grand Mosque Kutubia in Marrakesh. So he had that in his mind. But then when he went to Paris that year, the French government decided they had wanted to build a mosque to honor all Muslims who had served on France's behalf in the Great War. So he was there at the laying of the foundation stone for the Great Paris Mosque, and saw that the plans that was going to be done in this wonderful style. And so the Maharaja said, okay, I'm going with this style. And he even had the same architect, a Frenchman of Algerian ancestry named Maurice Manteau, design the plans for his mosque. So it's on a smaller scale, but again, it was influenced by the Kutubia Mosque and the Paris Mosque. So, and with the French architect. So that is one of the reasons why this is part of the mosaic of the Paris of the Punjab. And it's really a testament to his broad-mindedness and his being able to really how he really encompassed all of his community and embraced everyone. And it's really quite still standing as a memorial to his legacy. The Maharaja would continue to visit France every year, make his annual sojourns during the high Paris season up until 1939. And then, of course, there was the outbreak of World War II. He could not travel anymore, and that really broke his heart, not to be able to go to his beloved Paris, not to be able to see his friends. But this is one of the last images taken in 1939 when he's in France. It's a fine summer day, and he's just looking very happy, not a care in the world, enjoying the sunshine and the surroundings. Sadly, that was all going to end, and they go through a very difficult decade with not only the war, but then the partition of India, the absorption of the princely state. So we really saw that all come to an end. He wanted desperately to go back to France. And so in 1949, when finally vessels were applying back and forth with a little more frequency, he was determined to go back, but he went to Mumbai. He had a minor operation, but unfortunately caught ill afterwards and died at the Taj Hotel, and never got to see his beloved Paris again. So it's rather sad. But however, so much of his life was involved with France, and France was still so much a part of him. He would correspond regularly with all of his friends, and still always longed to go back. I want to conclude by saying that France and India continue to have a very important relationship. Commerce, diplomacy. France and India really have such a strong friendship today. In fact, right now, there is a new global summit going on in Paris, where it is led, the primary leaders of France and India, who are the key hosts to this. Our Prime Minister of India will be going to France to take part in Republic Day on July 14th. And it's really a wonderful legacy of friendship and diplomacy. And I think we have to thank Maharaja Jagatjit Singh for very early on for sowing the seeds of this friendship, which continues today. And I'm just going to leave you with one last image of the Jagatjit Palace. And I think we have time for some questions. So thank you.
Thank you so much for the very fascinating talk about a very fascinating person.
Most welcome.
There are a couple of questions that have come in, and I have some of my own questions as well, but I'll take up the audience questions first.
Oh.
The first one is from Prabdeep Kaur. Are there any letters which document the Maharaja's personality?
Oh, yes, indeed, there are. Lots of letters, and letters to his sons that, for example, one that I've quoted in the book was about how he was writing a letter to his son about he was starting to shift over some of the responsibilities to. And he said, I like to think that how I led the state was owed to my calm and unexcitable nature. So we know that he was very calm, very even keeled. Many times I've also heard from his grandson about his personality. But yeah, there are letters that describe him, mostly ones that he's written or letters written about him. So we know a lot about how, just about his personality, about his character, through the archives and other sources, and then of course through, most importantly, through his grandson, who remembers him so well.
Are there any books where our viewers can go and read some of these letters and know more about his personality? Well,
I've put down a lot about this. We have in print Patron and Patriarch. So that really talks a lot about the anecdotes. The current Maharaja, Brigadier Sukhjit Singh, really has these little vignettes about remembering his grandfather, telling stories, trying to, he didn't pontificate, but what he'd try to do is tell a story about, so his grandchildren would learn how to behave or how to reason or how to be very rational and how to be fair. That's one thing that I've always taken away from him. He was a very fair person.
Thank you. The next question is about the lovely palace that you showed us glimpses of. How did it come to be a military school? When did that happen? And can people still go and visit it?
That's a good question. It became a military school in 1961. It's a very large complex, and many of the families did not want to. They were given the option of, everyone stay there and, each take a wing, and so many branches decamped to Delhi, didn't want us because by then, Kapurthala became rather sleepy afterwards. And it was really too much to take on. It is a large, very large palace. There was no tourism in those days in Punjab. It was right after partition. A lot of people say, well, look at Rajasthan. This is apples and oranges. And it's an unfair comparison. Nothing really changed in Rajasthan after independence. It wasn't affected by partition. So that wasn't an option. No one was going to touch it. No one was going to visit Punjab. So that's why this was the best option. And the family really wanted this to benefit another young Punjabi, so that they would have a very good education and steer them towards serving in the military. So that was 61 when that happened. And as far as the second part of the question, I am really sad to report that it is off limits to the public. I've been lobbying for years. So many people want to see this building. It is magnificent. It's a showpiece, and it's a jewel of Punjab, and it should be accessible to the public. So I'm still lobbying, still trying, but it's really a shame that because of the Defense Department, it's under sort of that aegis, that it isn't so accessible.
And a related question, do we then know how well preserved it currently is? How much of the original fittings still survive?
Okay, well, that is a good question. In terms of, it hasn't been stripped. For example, a lot of buildings you've gone into and the facade looks really wonderful, but then it's all kind of white and blank and no ornamentation. That's all there. For example, there's a magnificent, even though all the rooms are French, I didn't have time to really go into it, but there's a beautiful Indian Durbar hall carved. That's the one Indian room, and that's in almost pristine condition, except for there's a ceiling issue. But overall, there are some aspects that need restoration, but overall the ornamentation's there. It hasn't been stripped. You'll find the original fireplaces, for example. You'll find the columns, the marble. So it's all there.
And the Darbar Hall that you mentioned, that's in an Indian style?
That's in an Indian style, and that is a really magnificent structure. I didn't have time. I was going to mention that I didn't have really a lot of time to go onto the artwork. Sometimes people ask about that. He loved to collect art and objets. So he did frequent the Paris salons, picked up paintings, mostly Orientalist paintings. So those also were hung throughout the palace. But really, it's such a beautiful building. I don't think it needed any art or embellishments. Just the detailing alone really stood out.
A question that I have, a lot of the European style buildings in our towns and cities, while they outwardly look like they're European, they do have these small little Indian elements that people have incorporated into it. So is there something like that in the palace outside of the Darbar Hall?
Yeah, just the Darbar Hall, and there was a small Gurdwara for the family located there.
And since he was so fascinated by French culture and French art, and he was a regular fixture on the social scene in Paris, was there any similar curiosity about Indian culture and Indian arts that he generated in France?
Yes, as a matter of fact, I think that he really would come. well, I mean, for example, Indian culture, a lot of people had not been introduced to it. And then he would come, sometimes he would have his chef make an Indian dinner. Or people wanted to do, when they did these fancy dress parties, they would consult him on, what is Indian? How do we make this, how do we make this authentic in terms of dress or styling and detailing? He was consulted on that as well. So for a lot of people, and then because of him, a lot of people who normally wouldn't have come out to India came out to India. So they discovered it. So in terms of this interchange of culture, he really did help facilitate a lot of that.
And a related question to this closeness, how did this sit with the British that he was so close to the French?
Okay, one thing I also neglected to mention, it's always been mistakenly, that's a very good question, so thank you. And it's always been written that, the Maharaja Kapurthala to rebel against the English, the British, he embraced everything and built this palace, French style, and spoke French. That is not true at all. There is absolutely not one iota of truth to that. He simply loved France and the architecture and just felt so welcome there. And a lot of fluent French people who speak French, non-native speakers, tell me they can express themselves much better in French and just are enamored. As I mentioned, I've always loved French architecture, everything about France. That influenced a lot about me and where I lived, and it was just what he became fascinated by. And it just as easily could have been he went to Italy and became the Italophile, but he loved Italy, but it was really France that spoke to him. So it had nothing to do, it wasn't an act of rebellion at all against the British. But they were curious. Sorry, they were curious. Yeah. I was going to add, they were curious about that, but that nothing more. I mean, they didn't take it as some affront or rebellious act.
Actually, one of the other comments speaks to Francophiles amongst the Indian elite at the time. So you have the Lal Bagh Palace in Indore that was also built along the lines of Versailles. That's
right. In fact, the furniture, there's another firm and the name escapes me, and that was similar to Waring and Gillow, and it's just at the tip of my tongue, and all the furniture was supplied by them, and that's been beautifully restored. And when you see that building, they too have the ceiling murals and a lot of these grand fireplaces, and I'm excited to visit Lal Bagh at some point. Yeah, and the Maharaj of Indore, also big, very well known in France too.
There is some degree of curiosity about the Kapurthala railway station and the Maharaja's personal railway saloon, if you can share something about that.
Well, this is hopefully maybe something for a future talk, because I'm delighted to announce that the Kapurthala saloon is going to be restored and on public display in Delhi at the Titus Museum, which will be opened up in about a year or two. And Mr. Titus is a passionate collector, has some of the most beautiful automobiles in India, and it'd be wonderful to see that. So I've actually been in consult with him about the Kapurthala saloon. It wasn't the grandest saloon. Now, we have to remember Kapurthala wasn't the richest state either. I mean, there's so much in these talks and facts that sometimes I fail to mention them, but Kapurthala wasn't Baroda, it wasn't Mysore. It was a relatively small state, but the fact that he had this global presence really kind of helped contribute to his aura and to being so well known. So the Kapurthala saloon wasn't, some of these, I call them mansions on rails. These private rail cars of the Gilded Age were beyond over the top. I mean, they were so lavish. The Kapurthala saloon wasn't, but it's still a really interesting, it's just to have that piece from our history and to have it, that it would be accessible to people, and that we're hopefully it will be done as true to His Highness's memory and to how it looked when it was in use. That's really a great thing. So I'm very excited about that.
Considering his fascination with all things French, did he have much of a connection with the French enclaves in India?
Not really. He visited Pondicherry. He did visit Pondicherry, and that certainly enjoyed that. He did travel across throughout India, but I wouldn't say that it was particularly strong in India.
Going to an altogether different topic, there is some curiosity about his belief system. So in some of the earlier photos, he is seen wearing a turban, but in some of the later ones, he isn't.
Okay,
So
yes, yeah.
was that ever a topic of controversy?
Yes, as a matter of fact, you can really see the Maharaja throughout the years, and we're so lucky with this great, there's this great photo resource. So you can really see how he's changed over the years. And yeah, so he was very much a devout Sikh. That was without question. But he had in 1897, he traveled and, traveling, you can imagine, doing a turban, long hair, just became so, it became rather arduous. And he even wrote in his diary, I know he had it cut in 1897 when he was in Europe, said, I know I've done a terrible thing, but, it was just getting to be, rather cumbersome. And that was indeed very controversial. But he would wear, he would wear the turban quite often. Sometimes in Europe, yes and no, depending on the occasion. But indeed, at the time, it was very scandalous.
I think we're done with all the questions that have come in. I'm just going through it one last time in case you've missed something. Audience, if there's anything that you would like to ask, please post your question over here.
Oh, someone has their hand up.
Yes.
Ahmad?
Yeah. So I'm sorry for the camera and the place that I can't use it, but thank you so much, Cynthia, for this amazing talk. Thank you, Rohan.
How kind of you. Thank you for joining
Yeah,
me.
I have the question around, so this Kapurthala Palace, which is now a military school, do we have any walk as such which are like conducted there where we can go and visit, or is it not allowed for civilians to enter into the military school?
Well, it isn't, again, it isn't. I lead heritage walks with some of my young colleagues, but unfortunately, it's sometimes it's possible to see the exterior, but right now it isn't possible to see the interior, and it's very frustrating, hoping that will change. And I think it's also important, hopefully we'll get an opportunity, a platform for people to voice that they would like to see this palace and learn more about the life of the Maharaja. Other buildings in Kapurthala have been restored recently, and the mosque, Abhinarayan Lamba, who's from Mumbai, who also did Lal Bagh, in addition to other structures throughout India, had restored the mosque, and some other buildings have been restored. And really, hopefully a cohesive tourism circuit will be developed soon, but unfortunately the palace isn't accessible, which is a shame. But hopefully it will be, and you'll be able to visit.
Thank you so
Fingers
much.
crossed. So a lot of people would like to continue staying connected with you so that they can know more about what you're doing. So is there a preferred social media channel that you would like to share?
Yes, thank you. I appreciate that. That's very nice to hear. Everyone, I didn't put that in the front. I'm on Instagram at Cynthia Meera Frederick. And His Highness and I have a site called at Maharaja of Kapurthala too. So mine is more personal, but more Kapurthala things are at Maharaja of Kapurthala. But also on the Khaki lab, Instagram handle, I'm tagged on that. So at Cynthia Meera Frederick, all one word. And yeah, I appreciate that, and really appreciate everyone taking the time to join us this evening. And a special welcome, also thanks for some of our friends who have joined us from other countries. I know we have friends from Italy. We have Enrico joining us from Italy, and hopefully we'll be giving a talk with him on his family. Angelo Firpo was his great uncle, and that's a really fascinating story in itself. We have some friends in from the UK and beyond, so really nice to have everyone with us.
Just one final question, if we have time for it.
Course,
Malti
yes.
would like to ask a question. Malti,
Hi
you can
there.
go ahead and unmute yourself.
Malati?
Hi.
Hi.
Hi, Cynthia. I follow you on Instagram, and I must thank you for coming today and sharing such wonderful, insights about Kapurthala and about the king. In fact, I'm yet to read any other book. One of the books that I read was The Spanish Dance, and I did discuss with you about it.
Yeah. Okay.
It's such a wild book and such a heart-wrenching book, but at the same time, there's so much of work about the Maharaja that is hidden in that book. And I'm so happy that you brought it out here, because
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
and I have to someday go to Kapurthala and see this place. It's on my list. I have to.
Wonderful. Thank you. And hopefully we'll have the government will open, or the
And thank
department
you
will
so
open the
much
palace.
thank you for bringing that costume at the Namak. I think I literally screeched when I saw it there.
Oh, okay. I'll just explain to everyone, for the India in Fashion exhibit that was at the Namak, the Ambani Center, Cultural Center, one of the Maharaja's beautiful brocade Banaras Sherwanis was on display there. So for a lot of people, they really enjoyed seeing that, because it was his actual one of his actual pieces of clothing. So, but thank you. I'm glad you saw that. I'm glad you joined us tonight. But you had a question? Did you had a question?
Yeah, my question is, who is the last person now in the family? Is there still any of the family living there in these palaces?
Yes, not in the Jagatjit Palace, but the Maharaja, the line continues, so that there are, future custodians, and, there are future people who want to, preserve the legacy of the Maharaja.
And they are keeping the legacy alive, right?
That's right, yeah. And Brigadier, His Highness, has done an incredible job in that. I mean, that's why, for example, this Sherwani was in such pristine condition, because he's looked after things. And it's challenging. It's very challenging in a place like Kapurthala. You have very hot, muggy summers, and then you have extremely cold winters. And that is not at all very detrimental, not at all helpful for preservation. But he has made it been such a commitment. Or when I showed you the scene of the Louis Vuitton trunks, those are His Late Highness's clothes too, and in pristine condition.
Good. Well, thank you so much, Cynthia. I mean, I want to read more about. Are there any more books, anything about history? Please share it.
Okay, well, thank you for your nice comments. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
On that note, I would also like to thank you, Cynthia, for a lovely session, and thank you to our viewers for joining us on a Saturday evening and for their enthusiasm. Our session has come to an end. I hope that all of you will join us very soon for another talk by Khaki, or even better, for one of our walks in Mumbai. I wish you all a very good evening. If you're in Mumbai, enjoy the rains. They're finally here. And have a peaceful Sunday.
Sure.
Good night,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Good night. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Merci beaucoup.
Merci. Merci.
Yes, the walks are happening tomorrow. It's even better than the rains.
I can't wait to join a Khaki walk. Okay. Take care, everyone. Bye.